Age is just a number. Yeah, I know. I call BS on that too when I'm sitting at home nursing my aching back as I wonder if I'll ever touch my toes again. But Willie Pietersen has other ideas. At 88 years old, this former lawyer and CEO is a professor of Columbia's Graduate School of Business, recently published his second book, and consults with some of the world's biggest and best-known organizations. And I had the good fortune to speak with him as today's guest on the DesuckifyWork Podcast. The secret to his success is the same secret he shares with leaders in his work. Stay relentlessly curious. Never stop searching for satisfying answers to life's biggest questions. Live life at a reasonable pace. Make time for reflection every day and keep yourself from getting swept up in the swirl of the inconsequential. And cultivate moral courage. Know what you stand for and act accordingly. Always. Sounds like solid advice to me, which isn't surprising coming from one of the most intelligent and thoughtful people I've ever met. Now, here's your chance to meet the incomparable Willie Pietersen. Okay, Willie Pietersen, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Thank you, TJ. Delighted to be on with you.
I'm excited to have you on. I think we'll get into a lot of interesting stuff. But before we do, I just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you came to be doing it.
Okay, sure. Well, I think the thing to know about me is that I was born and raised in South Africa and lived in South Africa during the apartheid era. Learned a lot about mental imprinting. When you're young, that's the only world you know. Reference points. I practiced law in South Africa and then left the country driven by the aversion to what was happening there in terms of segregation policies. And I became a corporate executive. So for 20 years, I was a CEO of various companies in different countries. And now for the last 27 years, I've been a professor of the practice of management at Columbia Business School. So I've had a wonderful, what I, in my own mind, consider to be a learning laboratory of learning, of living in different countries, doing different things, and learning more and more as I went along.
I like that term. The learning laboratory, and I think we may dive into that a little bit more later. I'm curious for you. It's kind of an interesting career journey from the law to executive CEO type work, and then working teaching. What sort of guided you through that journey?
As you experience life, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing, you realize the things that you're passionate about, the things that you're good at, that you could excel at, that give you real gratification and fulfillment. So it seldom happens, I find. I know you've had different careers as well.
I have, yeah.
Started with is not what you end with, because it's kind of a giant experiment in many ways as you navigate your way. And I became a lawyer because I was argumentative as a young kid, and I overheard my parents regularly saying to each other, "He's a real little lawyer, that one." And I overheard that, so I grew up thinking, well, I'm a real little lawyer. So I studied law. I enjoyed the discipline of law, the way of thinking, logical processes of law, the rigors involved in it. And so an interesting thing happened. I had a number of corporate clients and one rather major oil company. At the time was before the ExxonMobil merger, and this was the Mobil Corporation.
Okay.
Practicing law in Cape Town, and they were a regular client. And more, the content of our meetings when they came to consult with me encroached more and more onto the business strategy side. Considering this, these are the risks, these are the alternatives. what do you think? And I'd say, well, I'm a lawyer. And they said, well, we like the way you think. You're really strategic in your approach. Help us think about this.
Mm-hmm.
And it developed an appetite on my part for corporate leadership, for strategy, navigating a giant corporation through uncertain times and making choices.
Mm-hmm.
I began to develop. I felt I had an aptitude for it. I was interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when I decided with my family to leave South Africa, I realized I was trapped as a lawyer in my jurisdiction. I couldn't go to any other country and just practice law.
Mm.
I had studied law at Oxford in England, but I'd still have to write a bar exam there.
Right.
And so I thought, well, let me go the corporate route
Mm-hmm.
and hope to get an international career. So I applied for a job with the Unilever Group.
Mm-hmm.
I had an interesting interview with the head of HR, a guy called Peter Murray.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, you're a lawyer. Do you want to join the law office at Unilever? And I said, oh, my goodness, I kind of shuddered and said, oh, thank you. I'm really interested in the marketing side.
Mm.
And he said, well, what do you know about marketing? I said, no, I just know that I have to learn about marketing. And I've read 19 books on it up to now. And I gave him the list. I said, I've read all these books.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a book knowledge on it, but I've got a thirst to learn more.
Mm.
I'd like to learn on the job. And I said, I have one other motivation. I'd like an international business career.
Mm.
He looked at me and he said, Willie, Unilever is not a travel agency. Put in my place. I laughed with him about that comment. And I said, look, you've caught me out for being totally transparent.
Mm-hmm.
It will all be on merit. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen for good reason. If it does happen, I hope it does happen for good reason as well.
Mm.
It's going to be a judgment that you form. But that's my ultimate ambition, have an international business career. Well, I was lucky and that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, then you go to the next thing. As a corporate executive, it strikes me, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, that leaders are teachers.
Mm.
Like the thinking of the organization. Don't just tell people what to do.
Right.
And you're a creative person. And you realize, I'm sure, that it's not just your job to be creative, but to unlock it in others.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the organization becomes more creative because of your capability to do that and infect others with your ability.
Mm-hmm.
That's a teaching role.
Mm.
And as much by setting an example as you do by what you say. I'm a great fan of Ralph Waldo Emerson's statement is, what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say.
I love that.
So I just developed this great interest in developing a learning organization and the practices and policies that would help that along in a turbulent, fast-changing environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had this tendency always to have a learning system and try to be the catalyst for that.
Mm-hmm.
The dean at Columbia came for a lunch, fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
We happened to chat, and he said, we'd like to have some corporate executives to run a case study on a weekend from time to time. Would you be interested? And I thought, that'd be fun.
Mm-hmm.
So I did it, and I did it a few times, and I enjoyed it. And the last company I ran, eventually was sold. It was a subsidiary of Kodak, and Kodak, the mothership was sinking like the Titanic. So they wanted us to sell this, it's called Sterling Winthrop, which we did. There I was, having run companies for 20 years. And I remembered the fun I had doing this case study. So I called up Mayor Feldberg, the dean, and I said, can I come and have coffee? And we had a conversation, and it went from there. He's an interesting guy because I said, I quite enjoyed those. I hope they went well, those case studies. And he said, hold on. He opened his top drawer. He pulled out a file. He said, I've got your evaluations here. You did a pretty job. Come in and give it a go. So it's the way that happened.
Yeah.
And that's been a thrilling experience in its own right and a great learning opportunity again.
Mm. So what has each of your steps along the way, how has it influenced the next step, from the law to the corporate, from the corporate to the teaching? I mean, there's some threads that I hear you describing, but I'm curious if anything in particular stands out for you that influenced the next step in your career as you made those steps.
Well, first of all, serendipity plays a role.
Mm.
If Mayor Feldberg hadn't come to lunch on that fundraising visit,
Mm-hmm.
I'd never had the opportunity of meeting him and liking him,
Mm-hmm.
getting the invitation to do these case studies, etc. So doors open and we get lucky, but we have to recognize when luck comes our way.
Mm.
Times we kind of trip over it without really looking and pausing to say, hey, there's something here. And there are always moments in life that represent something that's pivotal.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to joining Columbia, Sterling Winthrop, subsidiary of Kodak, was sold. And now I was someone who needed to find another job. I didn't want to retire.
Mm-hmm.
I began to think what I wanted to do next. And I called up a couple of headhunters that I knew. And they said, you still wanted to keep doing this? You've done it for 20 years? And I said, don't you want to do something that's different? We can certainly do it. And I thought, well, I don't know. And I thought that was the trigger, just that question from one of them.
Mm-hmm.
By all means, I'll help you search for another CEO job, but don't you want to do something different now?
Mm.
And that made me think of Mayor Feldberg. And that's when I called him up and said, can I come for coffee? It was my something different consideration.
Yeah.
But it fell into a category of something where I felt I would feel at home and could be really fulfilled by the activity.
Mm.
So learning and teaching have always been prominent in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very driven by curiosity about how the world works, makes for success, etc. I have a motto consisting of three things.
Okay.
TJ.
Yeah.
One is never retire.
Mm.
Second is never stop learning.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is lead life at a reasonable pace.
Mm.
Now, as you get older, the last one becomes critically important, and you can't do the first two.
Mm-hmm.
Allow yourself to get overburdened.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that's been a really welcome part of this third career, from law to corporate to teaching, is that I'm able more or less to lead life at a reasonable pace. It's got, like anything else in life, it's got waves of activity and they wane a little bit. So you have to go with the flow and navigate as best you can. But that fits my motto.
Mm.
But again, we all have something inside us that drives us forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very good idea, I think, to make it explicit for oneself.
Yeah.
And when I think explicitly about those three things,
Mm.
I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
How did you come to those three things?
I think retiring is withdrawing from life.
Mm-hmm.
It's saying to yourself and to your body, I'm done now. I have nothing further to contribute.
Mm.
And now, it doesn't have to be something majestic. It doesn't have to be something that's world-changing.
Right.
And exceedingly demanding. But there are always ways to contribute something and keep you alive and active and engaged.
Mm-hmm.
I had a good friend who was a CEO in a major corporation.
Mm-hmm.
He retired and asked himself this question and said, what do I do next? I don't want to just if you like, withdraw and retire. And what he did was interesting. He was a very good leader. And he developed this coaching. You're a coach too, I think.
Yeah.
And what he did, he became an advisor to the principals of many of the underprivileged schools up in Harlem in New York.
Mm-hmm.
advising them on leadership practices in their schools. And he did this 3 or 4 mornings a week, morning only. And he loved it when we went out to dinner. That's all he wanted to talk about. But he said, I was interested in education. I didn't think I'd be a good teacher, but how could I make education more effective? Let's go to the leaders making that happen, and let's see if I can help them and drive them forward and help them be more successful. He loved it. It was so. That's another kind of an example. But of course, he didn't get paid for it, and that's not the important thing,
right?
Provided one's reasonably independent, which he was, so he had that freedom. There's always something we can do to contribute. I don't like the idea, well, I'm done now, I'm going to withdraw.
Yeah.
So that's just me. I mean, other people have a different point of view, fine. I hear people say, oh, I want to retire and play golf. Fine. That floats your boat.
Yeah.
But that's not me. So that's for me, the kind of a threshold thing. Now, if your health gives in, well, then you have to just work with the reality, right?
Of course, yeah.
The second one of never stop learning is a simple curiosity. It's never left me. I'll give you the origin story.
Yeah.
As a young kid in East London, South Africa, where I grew up, it's a smallish town. I went to an all-boys school there. In my bedroom, on the wall facing my bed was a world map. And South Africa is at the southern tip of Africa, right? So I put a pin in the town East London, which is sitting on the coast of the southern tip of Africa. The mornings, my window was facing east. In the mornings, the sun would shine through, and South Africa is a very sunny place. The sun would shine on that map. And I would lie there before I got up and stare at that little pin in that remote place. And my eyes would roam around the rest of that world map, all the various countries and continents. And I developed a yearning, a drive to explore the entire world as part of my brief existence on Earth, how long that was going to be. And not feel that I'm just going to live forever with that little pin is stuck in the map. That's not experiencing the world. That's living in a small, small little tunnel of existence and experience. I don't know what drove that. I spoke to my parents about it. And I want to discover, what they do in Thailand. I want, I'd learn about India and its big population. I'd love to get on and on. And they pipe down, you're a little lawyer. You argue too much. So that was just part of me.
Yeah. I'm really intrigued by the third piece, the reasonable pace piece, because I feel like many of us feel like we don't have as much control over that as we'd like to. The world feels like it's just like a snowball going downhill a little bit right now. Things are accelerating, and how do we stay with it, but somehow not get out of control in the process? And I hear you describing a way that you've found to navigate that. And I wonder, as you've worked with lots of other leaders and folks probably trying to manage a similar experience, how can you create or exist in a reasonable pace when it feels like things are so out of control?
Yes, the pace exceeds our internal capacity to manage our lives and navigate our lives in a way that is satisfying. That's the problem. There's a gap, and the gap is growing. It's a little bit like the gap that Jack Welch described when he said, if the rate of change outside of the organization is faster than the rate of change inside the organization is doomed. Now, thinking about us as individuals, we have this thing going on as well. The world is becoming faster changing. Technology is harder and harder to master, even the basics of functions. And so how do we deal with that? Now, this brings me to my way of thinking about leadership and the importance of leading ourselves. That's where leadership begins. So I have this framework I find useful. That we talk about leadership. Well, what is it? What are its components? I need to understand because these become the drivers as I learn my way forward to get better and better. My framework is a simple one. It's a Venn diagram.
Okay.
That says there are three overlapping and self-reinforcing, mutually independent elements that represent leadership effectively.
Okay.
First is leadership of self. That involves deep self-knowledge, having a clear set of values or principles that guide our actions, that are explicit, transparent to others, transparent to ourselves, and they also are the source of our ability to persuade others because of that authenticity that they represent. So making that explicit is very, very important, I think, for leadership effectiveness in an organizational context and for our own personal leadership. So that's number one.
Okay.
Second domain of leadership is strategic leadership. It's to make sure that you are able to provide a clear sense of direction for the organization, a winning way, and a clear set of shared priorities. And the third domain of leadership is interpersonal leadership, which is the ability to bring out the best in others. So I find that useful because as demands occur in a changing world, we've always go back to that to say, where do I need to put more pressure here? These things are interrelated. And you begin to kind of develop a way of thinking about, leadership effectiveness in the face of the challenges that you are confronting. Sometimes the challenge is more on interpersonal leadership. Sometimes it's more on strategic leadership. But being able to think about it in those components and then to say, I've got to bring the others into play as well as reinforcing elements. Second thing I find useful about this is that it's a great way to get feedback. Ed Koch was the mayor of New York. He walked around the streets and greet people. He was a great extrovert. And he would say to people, hi, how am I doing?
Yeah.
The first thing that occurred to me is, wrong question, my friend. Right? So how are you doing? Yes. It's too big a question. Well, fine. What else am I going to say? Now, if I want feedback, and we all need people who are our truth tellers, to be able to say, well, how am I doing at the personal leadership side of it? How am I doing at the strategic leadership? How am I doing at the interpersonal leadership? And make them more thoughtful and contributing ideas. So it's a vehicle, I think, for learning your way forward and getting good feedback from others. Now, we're talking here about dealing with a changing world and not being overwhelmed and leading life at a reasonable pace, right? Part of self-leadership. I think there's a set of habits. They're not, there's no magic bullet here. Who was it? Virginia Rometty, who was the head of IBM, said, celebrate progress, not perfection. We're always going to feel a little bit stretched.
Yep.
That you've got to stop short of being overwhelmed. Now, there's some key habits, I think. Number one, take a walk regularly. Just withdraw and take a walk regularly. Number two, keep a learning journal as a way to think about what you're doing more deeply, record your learnings as part of kind of navigating your life and your leadership. I worked as an advisor to a company in the UK called Aviva, International Financial and Insurance Group. And their chairman was a great guy. And he took his top team on a retreat every quarter.
Okay.
It was in their calendars, right? Not just budget time, etc., but these retreats were scheduled right at the beginning of the year. And he asked me to facilitate them, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And this, for me, is under the heading of we have to find ways of getting away from the urgent and thinking about the important. That's a crucial thing. If we can't separate the important from the unimportant, everything has equal status, so we're just chasing after everything.
Mm-hmm.
Those were wonderful. They weren't allowed to, there was nothing on the agenda about current financial performance or anything. All longer term, critical strategic issues. Always brought an external speaker that provided a perspective from the outside, fresh eyes, and interwove deep discussions about big strategic issues with playful things. We played a round of golf. Most of us were not golfers, so it was a hit and giggle. But you get to know people that way, and reduces your barriers, and you laugh together. And every now and again, he'd say, "Well, here's a big issue. We need to discuss it. Go out in pairs, walk and talk, and come back. Come back with, wow, this occurred to me, that occurred to me." So I found this a wonderful practice under this heading of get away from the urgent and think about the important and schedule it. So, that's another way of refreshing and making sure that you're concentrating on what's truly important in your daily activities. Prioritization is absolutely key to manage a busy life. If you can't prioritize, it's all just turmoil, chaos, and mess. Now, here a great example is Hans Vestberg. He's the CEO of Verizon. I know him very well.
Okay.
He used to run Ericsson, and I was an advisor at Ericsson over a number of years. Now he's running this giant communications company, Verizon. And but he's a habit that he mentioned and reinforced and repeated over and over at Ericsson, he still applies in Verizon. When he got his appointment for this, we sat down together and had a chat. And I said, well, this is a big transition, Hans. At Ericsson, you had about sort of 10 global clients representing 80% of your business. Yeah, you've got over 100 million customers, and you've got business to consumer and business to business. The prior business was simply business to business. Whole new game. And I said, how do you think about that? And he said, I stuck to this old habit that I used to have at Ericsson. I keep 2 lists. First list is the list of my key priorities. Second list is my to-do list, the daily activities I have to take care of, that we have to do those. And he said, every morning I literally get into a kind of meditative state. And I spend at least 10 minutes studying, looking at my key priorities and thinking about them very, very deeply every morning. Then I look at my to-do list. And from my to-do list, I pick the very few things that I was going to tackle first that most strongly supported my priorities. And that's the way he prioritized a chaotic world. It's a simple practice, but it helps enormously. What I'm going to do today, I've prioritized. Now, maybe there's an urgent thing that overrides everything else.
Sure.
It's life. There are unexpected things. But typically, if you are clear and good at prioritization, and you do this through practice, you'll be much better at managing your life. Some things don't need to be attended to immediately. They just don't. So don't just tackle it. So I find that's a useful habit. Now, the other one that goes more to the way we run an organization that helps people manage their jobs in that kind of way, leading life at a reasonable pace, being able to manage what they have to do, is to make sure there's a clear set of corporate priorities and that they are shared. What we all do in an organization and our functions is to translate those priorities into the priorities we are pursuing in our own functional areas of responsibility. We're not just doing our own thing. And so that also creates a sense of cohesion. We're all moving the game forward along those 5 priorities and translating them into our functional priorities as well. So prioritization, I find, is a key to leading a chaotic life.
Yeah, it's interesting as you describe the different modes of prioritization. I'll kind of work backwards. The corporate priorities, I think there's two things that show up for me. One, having them, right? Yes. And that's step one. But I think the more important step that I think is underdeveloped, certainly in my experience, I worked in advertising agencies for 25 plus years. I'm not sure I was ever fully clear on what any of those agencies' priorities were, other than some vague sense of supporting the client with good work. Yes. That was like, and what I realize is I may have been told at some point what those priorities were, but I wasn't told enough for it to sink in. And then I wasn't also given, I don't know whether it would be guidance or an opportunity to create on my own a way of connecting to those priorities, as you said, through the work that I was responsible for. I feel like we might have the big corporate meeting where we go, we're going to do this.
Yes.
But we don't operationalize it very well. And I don't know why that is, but that seems really important to me. And then I think on the personal level, what I loved about what you were describing, the person who has this habit of their own priorities and then figuring out how their to-do list can connect to that, which is sort of a smaller version of what we described at the corporate level. Even as you described it, I felt my blood pressure lower by about 10 points because it just felt so sensible and easily to embody, right? I can imagine I've got these kind of 3 priorities for this year or this quarter or whatever. Right. And I've got this mess of stuff that just constantly shows up in my life, and being able to very easily connect those dots. And even as you mentioned, having a bit of a contemplation around those priorities to allow them to really be inside of me so that I can make those decisions. It feels like a way of stepping into the day immediately, where you instead of stepping into this sort of swarm of bees and all that, like that's what it feels like for a lot of us. It's just like, oh, I now am stepping very deliberately to a place where there might be one bee on a flower. That's kind of how my brain starts to picture it, right? It just massively simplifies it. So I think those things are really helpful. I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, and this I think connects to the self-leadership idea. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. You mentioned the idea of serendipity in your own career and the ability to recognize it, right? Meaning, I'm not, you mentioned, I think, something like sometimes we just step over it or stumble over it and kind of miss it. How can we train ourselves to be better at recognizing those moments in our lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the single word answer is curiosity. And which means, and I talk about energetic curiosity, not idle curiosity is just sit there and wonder why. Energetic curiosity is the determination to find a really satisfying answer to a question that you have. And I think if you read widely, have a lot of discussions with different kinds of people that introduce you to different perspectives, have a lot of curiosity, luck or opportunity will come your way, because those are invitations to kind of innovative ideas and activities, and it'll trigger something inside of you. So there's something there that I would find fulfilling. That's the recommendation of a book or whatever it is. So serendipity, if you sit in a dark room and close the door and don't switch off the TV, it's unlikely that these things will occur to you. It might, through just contemplative, if you're a Buddhist.
Yeah.
But if you've got this kind of curiosity and a wide range of exploration of things, my wife and I always sending each other interesting articles or snippets out of the newspaper, and then we sit and talk about them. And what comes out of a conversation like that is, that triggers another thought. There's always a kind of a lateral thought. You go from linear to lateral.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, that triggers something else. And then my wife would say, well, why don't you try that?
Mm.
You do that if, you look excited about it.
Mm.
I think that's where the recognition comes from. It comes from something inside of you that says, that would be interesting to do, that would be exciting to do or fulfilling. I'm going to do a little experiment to see if I might be good at that. So I think there's no profound magic to it. I just think it's that kind of searching, curious kind of approach to life.
Yeah. And
it recognizes these things.
And
I just want to go back to your very good question about people working in functions that are not, they're not the CEO, and recognizing how important it is not just to have your own functional priorities for what you do. These need to line up with what the corporation is trying to do, because you need to really translate that down.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of work with companies where I pose these kinds of questions. And the point that you've made, I hear as a chorus coming back.
Yeah.
But we don't know what their priorities are. They're not clear. Well, then we have an interesting conversation. Because the next question is, whose job is it to clarify that? Now, my challenge back to people is there's no they in leadership. No, why don't they? That's not leadership. That's kind of victimhood. I'm a victim of, they're not responding to what I need. You have to go get it. So why don't you write down on a pad, be helpful, be constructive, don't just sit down and say, what the hell are your priorities? You catch people stone cold.
Yeah.
Write down what you think may be the corporate priorities. Go along and have a conversation and just say, look, I tell you what, the way I think about my job is I need to be very, very clear about the corporate priorities. My job is to translate them into what I do functionally, because work doesn't happen at the corporate office. It happens in the C-suite. You're a guidance system.
Right.
Work happens through the functions. I'm a function. I've got to do the work. I've got to know what's important. Discuss it. Here's my view of it. Tell me where I'm wrong. In other words, go get it. You owe your team that.
Yeah.
Now, I tell you a little magic moment for me in witnessing something equivalent to this. Again, I won't name the company, but I was working with a very large company, and we were doing consulting work on strategy at a number of workshops. And on one of them, they said, well, we'd like to call our CEO to join us at that particular meeting and get a perspective from him. So we had a Q&A, and a very good question was raised by somebody who said, tell me, what does it feel like to be the head of a giant global corporation like this? How do you think about leading? What keeps you awake at night? What's your philosophy? Wow, the guy's now going to make a speech. Well, he didn't make a speech. He went to a flip chart and he drew a gearbox. Just silently, we watched this happening. And he said, let me tell you what it feels like to be head of a giant corporation. It consists of a series of responsibilities. Leadership is about service, not about power. Now, I have my hands on the big wheel on a gearbox, just like this one. And my job is to turn this big wheel on just the right issues, because I know that if it turns on just one notch, all the smaller wheels are spinning faster and faster. Those wheels are you. So my job is to make sure I turn that on just the right issues, the right priorities. You all have your hands on a large wheel, but must mesh with mine. So we share the same priorities. And then you have to turn that wheel on the right issues so your team is spending its energy on the right issues. That's the way I think about leadership. And I thought it's a lovely metaphor.
Yeah.
He paused and said, and they're largely engineers in the room. And he said, so tell me, what's the role of a gearbox? Hand went up. To transfer power. He said, exactly. Now, that was his speech. And that company, this was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That company still has this, what they call the parable of the gearbox.
Mm.
When they talk about leadership, they talk about the parable of the gearbox to remind them of how you need to have these shared priorities and turn that big wheel on the right issues. Everybody's spinning on the things that are critically important.
Mm.
So this is for me another way of capturing this idea in a very vivid way.
Yeah, it's interesting because you also mentioned he was speaking to a lot of engineers, so he's like found a way to speak their language as well, right? And I think that can be key too. If you want to tell a story about this kind of leadership approach, like tell it in a way that people will understand it and hear it and be able to internalize it. The other question that comes up for me in that context is there's sort of the CEO's turning, and then everybody else is turning. But what I wonder, and this is a challenge that can come up sometimes within, certainly in ad agencies, probably everywhere, it's the cross-functional stuff, right? So even if we know, okay, these are the priorities of the company, and I kind of know, okay, these are the wheels or the levers I need to turn. How do I pay attention to what everyone else is doing and understand how their levers affect mine and how to do that? That feels like another piece of leadership that we often just kind of feel our way through, as opposed to having some clear intention around it. What's your perspective on how to best navigate the complexities that can show up when you're working with lots of different departments and functions, hopefully towards a shared goal?
Yes. The last phrase you used is the answer to your question, which is a shared goal.
Right.
There's nothing as powerful as a shared purpose.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about human motivation, now I'm not a psychologist, but I think the psychology of it is clear.
Mm-hmm.
Dedication to a cause larger than ourselves, combined with the ability to make a difference to the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very fulfilling, motivational thing for human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We all hear a lot about siloed thinking. Now, is there a perfect answer to no? The world is messy.
Mm-hmm.
Always looking for silver bullets. There aren't any. There are just steps we can take that improve what we do. And the more steps we take, the better we get. That's the way that champion athletes work as well.
Mm-hmm.
This magic of micro progress, one step leading to another and opening up new avenues of creativity and ways of doing it. So I've got this thing in strategy that an organization needs to have not just a set of priorities, but priorities are a response to something else at a higher level.
Mm-hmm.
What I call our winning proposition.
Mm.
Winning proposition in an organization, the definition of it is, what unique value will we create, unique benefits will we create for our customers that give them a compelling reason to choose us? In a competitive world, not a value proposition. A value proposition is just, I've got a ticket to play. It's a participative thing.
Mm-hmm.
A winning proposition is the margin of difference in the value that you've got to create that helps, that compels customers to choose you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a whole set of examples about those. Now, it starts there, and your priorities then are, what are the very few things we need to do outstandingly well to achieve our winning proposition? Mm-hmm. They are a response. You can call that winning proposition a vision for success, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. The priorities are, what do I do? That's the translation into everyday action. Mm-hmm. What do I do to realize that, what I call winning proposition? Mm-hmm. It helps us compete more effectively. Mm-hmm. In the external environment. So when functions get together to discuss and challenge and say, what should we do? We owe allegiance to the winning proposition.
Mm-hmm.
That's our duty to take actions that support the winning proposition and the priorities.
Mm-hmm.
That's shared. That's not functional.
Right.
Now, I've got my set of priorities that responds to the priorities of it. They might be different from yours. You may be in the operations side, I'm on the marketing side.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the same, but they all lead to the same shared purpose.
Yeah.
But when we know what to do, let's go back to that shared. Again, if a company doesn't have a clear winning proposition, in every consulting project I do, I stress the importance of that and don't leave that issue alone until that's been clearly defined by the organization. And I hear back from companies afterwards to say, that was pivotal. That made all the difference in terms of. So we have two bosses. I'm not talking about human beings now.
Mm-hmm.
The first boss we have, and I'm sure you resonate with this, is outside the organization.
Mm-hmm.
It's what customers need.
Right.
And that really dictates what we should do internally. So there's a dictator out there.
Mm-hmm.
Second one we need, and this connects to the outside one, is this winning proposition that responds to that external dictator and clarifies in words that become actionable through priorities what we'll do to respond to the external dictator. I just look at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that everybody, no matter what their function may be, has got a working knowledge of the external environment. You don't have to be an expert at it.
Right.
But a working knowledge, you go to the operations people and say, well, everything we're doing at the end of the day, whether it's efficiency or whatever it is, should lead to better outcomes for the customers we seek to serve. And they say, that's not my job. And I say, yes, it is. It absolutely is your job. So at least understand that we're all collectively, like a sports team, playing together cohesively for that game plan. So I mean, it's a kind of a philosophy of, that's why I say I think leaders help people think about. Howard Gardner, the psychologist at Harvard, I've read everything he's written. He's a very clear thinker.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who invented multiple intelligences and laid them out, very, very clear and compelling idea. And in the middle of one of his chapters, I came across this statement, went into my learning journal, which defined leadership.
Okay.
And he said, a leader is someone who, through his words and his actions, are able to change, not maintain, change the way people think, feel, and behave. So not just how they behave, that's just compliance.
Right.
But when you influence the thinking and the feelings, now you get commitment to something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the motivational thing. So I think we're back to this idea that leaders are teachers, helping people in the way that I've described. And there are, of course, other ways. I don't have ultimate wisdom on it. It's just this is the way I try to make our people help them think about the nature of business and what we're trying to do. And very soon when everybody thinks in the same terms, we're customer-centric here. We're all understanding what's happening out there. We go to the marketing people and say, show us the research. I'm interested in seeing statistically what's happening, because how well are we doing at meeting those requirements? We're all putting together on those things. And the way we think about prioritization, the way we need to think about getting away from the urgent and thinking about the important. All those things, I think, lie on us as leaders, not only of ourselves, but of others. Think and feel in different ways, because the feeling of being overwhelmed is not a pleasant feeling.
No.
It's a kind of feeling of being defeated by events. So I'm sure, I keep quoting from things I've read, but what occurs to me in the moment here is this wonderful book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. He was an inmate in the concentration camps during the war.
Yeah.
And he suffered terrible privation. He was skin and bone. And he realized that the only thing that was keeping him alive was his attitude for dying all around him. And he then developed this credo, if you like, or philosophy. And he became a psychotherapist in Vienna, I think, after the war. And the way he described it was that between what happens to us through external circumstances and our response to those events, the gap. And in that gap lies our final freedom that nobody can remove from us. Our agency to decide how we will deal with that. Nobody can take that away. He said, they took away my dignity. They took away my health. They inflicted pain on me. They could not take away my final freedom of deciding how I would deal with that.
Yeah.
Oh. Very, very compelling example of personal leadership. This tells the story of a friendship he developed with one of the other inmates. And one day, this particular friend was too weak to get out of his bunk, get up in the morning and go on the march. It was winter time and do hard labor. And he said, I can't. So Franco gave him half of his bread that he'd got, a meager breakfast. This will make you feel a bit better. He said, you stay there. We'll tell the guard that you're too ill to get up, and let's hope you feel better tomorrow morning. So anyway, came back that evening. The bunk was empty where his friend had been lying. And so he said to the guard, he said, where's my friend? He was not feeling well. Where's my friend? And the guard said, come here. Took him to the window. He looked through the bars in the window, looked at the incinerator, and there was smoke coming out. He said, you see that smoke? That's your friend. Now, I tell that story because this is an example of what he had to deal with and overcome. And in the face of all of that privation, sorrow as well, at loss, he developed this man's final freedom. Kept saying that they can't take that away from me. Torture won't do it. Nothing else will.
Wow.
Now, that's a very strong human being.
Yeah.
Started with, I have a freedom of agency in the face of circumstances. And that is my final freedom. Nobody can take it away. Now, thinking at a more mundane level every day, we're not subjected to that kind of privation.
Right.
We do have our final freedoms to be able to lead our lives in the way that we choose.
Yeah. I actually read that book not too long ago, within the past year or so. And
yeah, wonderful.
It's an amazing book. And in some ways, I think if as human beings, we could only read one book, that might be one to read, because it distills sort of the core of what it means to be human and the idea of what it means to have agency as a human being in about as powerful a way as you can do it. And it's also just beautifully written. I mean, the way he tells the stories, there's something very both approachable about it. I mean, it's very descriptive, but not in a flourishy kind of way, but you feel like you're in the experience the way he wrote it. I mean, it's a remarkable book, but I think this notion of that we have the ultimate freedom to decide how we react, respond, move forward through whatever we're experiencing is certainly one that not easy always, but a good reminder, I wonder, as leaders, I don't know that there's much we can do to sort of share that with people other than to demonstrate it. Right? I don't think you can just tell somebody that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a certain amount of preaching that you can do.
Yeah.
People don't learn as strongly from that as they do from example. I mentioned in my book, I think my very first lesson in leadership, when I was 6 years old, living in South Africa. Father was a station master, very humble job. he wore a uniform, which impressed me.
Mm-hmm.
And the Second World War was waging up in Europe, 6,000 miles away. It had nothing to do with South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no conscription there. And he decided, after this is 1943, the Allies were in a pretty poor situation and looked as if they might lose the war.
Mm-hmm.
He decided to enlist as a volunteer to go and fight up.
Well,
We called it, my husband is up north, people would say about. Husbands were up north fighting. And I vaguely remember conversations at the dinner table with my mother saying, well, why would you want to do that? The war's not here, it's over there.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really affect us. He said, well, it does in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
But he gave only one answer. And the answer was because it's the right thing to do. He was not a man of many words, elaborating philosophically and giving all kinds of, this is the way the whole world works and it's interrelated. He just, because it's the right thing to do. And I remember actually vividly standing at the railway station when his train went off and he was waving out of the window, going to the port onto a troop ship, taking him up to Europe. He didn't know where he'd be deployed. He was just there as a volunteer. He came back safely, ultimately. As a kid, for me, that was just experiencing a bit of loss. I'm going to miss my father.
Yeah.
But the lesson began to sink in as I grew older, and I began to recognize the implications, the real meaning of what he did. The way I've clarified it for myself is that there is this difference between physical courage, which is just doing adventurous things for the hell of it, skydiving. Nothing wrong with that, perfectly legal. It doesn't help anybody else, but fun. And then moral courage, which is standing up to do the right thing, but also, regardless of the circumstances, it can be quite severe. Sometimes physical circumstances, like, deciding to do the right thing and go to war. Now, you might be killed. So I have developed this reverence for people who show moral courage.
Yeah.
Of doing the right things. They might have a hit to their reputation. They might lose, if you're in government, might lose my power. Well, actually, you won't lose your power because you've exercised your power by doing what you've done. So that for me has become a fundamental principle. And I realize where it comes from. It was from that example when I was 6 years old. And I'm a lot older than 6 now.
Well, I appreciate that story. I think, again, it's another just really beautifully simple, even though it was big. There's just such a simplicity of the message that came through to you, even as a little boy, that then evolved as you evolved in your ability to sort of take it on and really understand what it meant. You also mentioned that this is, connected to some of what's in your book, and I wanted to give you a chance to just mention your book and a little bit about, what people can take away from that. What
the book is called Leadership: The Inside Story. Part of that title was motivated by the fact of what's inside us is the most important part and starting point and foundation of effective leadership. It's the inside story. We lead from the inside out.
Yeah.
It's what Marcus Aurelius, the Roman philosopher and emperor, called our command center. Those are the principles that govern our actions and serve as a motivational spring for others. So the more I thought about that, the more I thought of portraying it in a book. My previous 2 books were about strategy, how to do strategy, how to make a winning strategy, and all the rest of it in a disruptive, changing environment. And I discovered something. I developed a process called strategic learning. And it was been applied by a number of different companies, and it's kind of the main way strategy now gets taught at at Columbia's executive education programs, strategic learning process. I've worked with numerous companies applying that process. And one day, leading up to an engagement with a company, somebody said, now, tell me, does this process always work? Well, of course, the answer is no, absolutely not. Magic bullet. It's the quality of leadership that makes it work. You are the magic bullet, not the process. No process is a magic bullet. It's how well you use it. More and more, what I witnessed was that companies that had very strong, effective leadership excelled at doing this. Companies that didn't seem to have that strong leadership didn't do quite as well using it. And it struck me then, at the end of the day, I called it a leadership process, leading through strategic learning. That really the governor of success at the end of the day, regardless of what processes you use, is about leadership effectiveness. So I thought, well, all right, my next book is then going to be about leadership incorporating these key ideas, including the 3 domains of leadership. Use this as a way to constantly improve our own leadership capability, do it systematically, thoughtfully, getting feedback, and using that framework as a kind of a foundational framework for our ongoing journey of learning our way to success. So that was the springboard for writing a book on leadership and calling it The Inside Story.
Yeah. I like the title. It's provocative and evocative. It makes me wonder what it's about. So I appreciate learning a little more of what it's about. And I think I think we don't always recognize the sort of inside out nature of leadership. It's almost like for many, and there's probably a lot of reasons for this, we actually feel the opposite. We feel like we have to somehow step outside of ourselves and become someone different to be a leader, rather than figure out what's inside of us that will make us most effective as a leader, right? And so we end up copying or mimicking some caricature of what it means to be a leader, rather than truly being inside out. And I wonder for you, because you teach this stuff in addition to having lived it for quite a long time. What, if anything, it helps people to see that it really is an inside out job, and that you need to start there. Is there any insight that usually helps people make that connection from, oh, I'm playing the role of a leader versus I am actually embodying the role of a leader?
Well, their techniques, I think, some work better than others. The word teaching doesn't really fit what I do. It's more of facilitating learning. And we do that best through asking questions, providing frameworks that provoke thinking, getting people to participate in thinking about those frameworks. So one of the exercises that I find helpful is kind of the lifeline exercise. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's to think about your life, mark down pivotal moments that have influenced who you are and the way you think and behave and what your beliefs are. Just like I've explained this, well, when I was 6 years old, this and that happened. So at 8, I got a series of kidney stones and a big crisis and almost died. And it made me reflect and think about the value of life, right? But that actually happened to me when I was 21 years old. And I was told, when I checked out, I remember the front desk people said, oh, glad to see you walking around again. We thought you were going to die. And I said, oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
But these things are pivotal. The experiences that I've had in different settings in the world and the way I was able to look from the outside in at South Africa and this segregation policy for apartheid. they all taught me something. Now, these things are inside you, but do this lifeline exercise and draw this little map. What were the events? How do they influence who you are, the way you think, etc.? Take that after, and then they'd share a number of these, and they'll put them in pairs, and they'd share, and they'd ask each other questions. Put them internalizing a little bit, and say, ask your partner questions, for a deeper meaning of how that influenced who you are. You are who you are. Everybody else is already taken up. So you have to be authentic, right?
Yep.
And we go from there to say, well, could you capture that now in terms of the critical values pursue in your life that are important to you? We're always going to fall short. But the magic is knowing what you've fallen short of. Otherwise, you can't learn. So it's inside you because you react instinctively to something, and that deep inside there's a belief in there, a belief system that is necessary for behavior. Make it explicit, make it real. Make yourself in that way very self-aware of who you are. You'll recognize that kind of authenticity and self-awareness in their dealing with you, and that makes you a real person. And they will come up with, here are the critical things for me. They compare notes, and they recognize that everybody's unique. They've all got their own. You step back and say, now, what do you see as the common thread through everything you've heard about everybody else's lifeline and values? And the answer is they all somehow or another have a moral foundation. So it's an exercise that people find quite meaningful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Participation in the sharing that provokes the deeper thought and the better outcomes.
Yeah. I like just even the simple phrase that you recognize that they're a real person. And like, I think we lose sight of that both about ourselves sometimes in the business world. We step into the role and we often see everyone around us as kind of avatars for something, as opposed to those are just human beings trying to sort through life the same way we are. And if we relate to them that way, not only will it be more enjoyable, but we'll probably be more successful because we're going to be living in the real world as opposed to some imagined sort of dynamic that we've created in our heads often. I have you spend a lot of time as a CEO, and I'm really curious, is there something as a CEO in your experience, or maybe hearing this from others you worked with, that you would love for folks who have never been in that role to understand about the role?
I think what I would mention here is that it's a team sport. You can't do it alone. This notion of, coming in as a white knight, all the problems on your own, I think is a misguided way of thinking about it. So work happens through people, and it's the team that matters. The most difficult decisions that I can think of, they fall into two categories. One is about people, and the other one is about charitable donations and how to allocate those funds. Those are the hard decisions for me. But on the people front, the hardest decisions, the most important decisions, are who you choose to be in your team, how you deal with people who are underperforming. And if you don't deal with the people who are underperforming, you are practicing a double standard. Because you're saying to those who are performing, thank you for your contribution, and you're saying to the others, it's okay. You just sit in the boat, you don't have to row. So we've really got to be clear-sighted, fair, respect people's dignity, but take the necessary action to make sure you keep the right team and let go of those who are unable. That typically it's because they're not a good fit for the role. They're not flawed, deficient human beings. They're human beings that got put into a slot that didn't suit their skills. That's all that's happening here.
Yeah.
I think you could kind of help them along to say, there are other roles that would suit you better and you'd be happier. take the necessary action with the necessary amount of generosity, I always felt as well.
Yeah. Mm.
So those are important for me. It's a team sport at the end of the day, and it's a committed team that matters.
Mm.
The other area of hard decisions, every week I had somebody come into my office to say, can you support our charitable endeavor?
Mm-hmm.
We're all important.
Yeah.
I couldn't turn around to any one of them and say, oh, yours is not important.
Right.
Children's health, education, housing, poverty, on and on.
Mm-hmm.
No, you wish you could do it all. We're back to prioritizing.
Yeah.
So when we sat down at the end of the year to determine our budget and how to allocate, we had two choices. Spread the peanut butter very thin, give a little bit to everybody, that won't make a real difference.
Mm.
Or use 2 or 3 things and concentrate our resources on that and try to make a real difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I went for the latter, which meant I had to disappoint some people.
Yeah.
But I would explain why I did it.
Yeah.
And I felt that that was more satisfying to us. We did a lot on education.
Mm-hmm.
And we got some people in that company to go and teach kids to take a class on life skills. How do you deal with money?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, etc. These are young kids, 10, 12 years. And how do you deal with things that don't go well? When you get bullied, how do you respond to being bullied? Make them think about managing their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of our people went in and did that. So we gave not just money, but we put effort and time into it as well.
Yeah.
So that made a difference. That's hard. Which priorities do you choose?
Sure. Mm.
Got all these problems you'd love to solve in the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's
categories: choosing the right people, removing those who are not performing, and then choosing the right things to make a difference externally, to make communities better, to make the world a bit better. Those are hard decisions.
Yeah, and they both bring me back to your note about moral courage. I mean, there's a certain amount of courage that is needed both in the how to deal with some of those difficult decisions at work as it relates to people, and know that you're ultimately doing what's right for both the organization and that specific person to help them move somewhere that's better. But that does take courage, because there's going to be pain and hurt caused by that. And the same thing with the charities. I mean, yeah, you're going to have some very wonderful organizations who are going to be upset.
Yeah.
And you say that we can't support you, but you're choosing that based on a moral compass that tells you I can make more impact if I apply our energy and our resources here. So I like how those both demonstrate that. I wanted to get to a question from our previous guest. I like to always ask folks to share a question for the next guest on the show. And this woman, her name is Asmara Kazmi, and she had an interesting question. It's kind of a big question, and maybe we can focus it around our approach and our thinking around leadership and making change in the world. But her question was, what do you believe that we've gotten wrong about how things are in the world of leadership, let's say, and how is that preventing us from potentially unlocking something that could be in the world?
Yeah. As you say, it's a big question.
It is. Yeah.
It deserves some thought and not just a flippant answer.
Mm-hmm.
As I look at the world, I don't want to sound like a wizened old crow, but as I look at the world, I think we can do a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can do a lot better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's always true, that we can do a lot better. And that's the way I think we should conduct our lives. We're always trying to do a little better.
Mm-hmm.
But leadership is not a trivial thing. It exists in different levels. There's national leadership. There's leadership of the military. There's organizational leadership in the business world and not-profits. And there's leadership within our families.
Yeah.
Parenting is a form of leadership. This is an important thing.
Yeah.
Makes a difference to others. And I think we need good leadership, thoughtful leadership in that way. I think that truth of leadership is to understand. I talked about it being a team sport, that's for sure, but you're the team leader. You can't just say to the team, it's a team sport, and go and play. You are the leader, you've got to set the direction and the priorities, right? And the fundamental truth, I think, is that leadership is not about power. It's about service. It is about making the difference to others. It's not self-seeking. It's seeking to make a difference to others. I think we need more of that in our public servants.
Yeah.
In particular, who we look up to, and our children look up to. My grandson, who's 10, he observed the scene that's happening now, and he came up to me and he said, "Is it okay to tell lies?" And I said, "Well, tell me what you think first.
Right.
Why you think that way. And then let's talk about it." And I said, "Is your conclusion that matters most?
Right.
Like what you see when somebody tells a lie? Do you like it?" Well, sometimes they get an advantage. And I said, "Think longer term. Think about the effect on others." So I think it's just an example. I'm now a grandpa, right?
Yeah.
And that's a leadership role. They're looking at me as a kind of, okay, maybe you've got some wisdom somewhere from all of your long life. And look at you that way and you think, whoa, okay, well, maybe yes, but not as much as you think I could provide. And so I honestly, I take that seriously. I take that role seriously. It just happens in my personal circumstances that my son died 2 years ago, unfortunately. So I'm the kind of male figure in that little family of my daughter-in-law and their 3 kids. And so I think about that very much. Of course, there's just the family cohesion of being a grandpa. But there's also the feeling that I know that I'm serving in a kind of a leadership role in some way. I know they're watching me. I know they are thinking about the way I approach the world, that it makes a difference to them.
Yeah.
So I think it's multidisciplinary. It exists in different settings. It requires a philosophy, I think, an approach that spans across all of these settings. I think the military leadership actually do better than the civilian leadership. There's deeper understanding there.
Yeah.
Leadership is about service and not just about power.
That's interesting, because I wonder if some folks would think that that's not the case. And I think it's maybe just because military tends to represent power in some way to people, right? Because there's the force of might in it. But I think what I'm hearing is like, there's so much work done within a military setting to help people understand the purpose of it and the fact that it is in service of a much bigger cause, that it allows you to know at a deeper level the impact that both your words and, more importantly, I think your actions are having on people. And so then I connect that back to you, as a grandpa, and it's like, yeah, that your 10-year-old grandson is probably looking at you, not just to hear what you say, but to kind of notice, like, how should I move through the world? And you're sort of, embodying that, whether you like it or whether you want to or not, you're in that role, right? And maybe in the military, people are very aware that they're in that role.
They're aware in that role, but if you think about the ultimate commandos, they're always aware of that they're serving their country in some way.
Yeah.
And that there's a cause. Hopefully it's a worthy and moral cause. And sometimes there are questions about that.
Yeah.
And that creates dilemmas. At the end of the day, they're the ones who've got to say, we're doing this for a worthwhile cause. You will never, ever have a great motivated fighting force if they don't believe they're fighting for something worthwhile.
Yeah.
Got to give them that feeling they're fighting for something worthwhile. That's kind of this element of, this is about service to others. It's about land, it's protecting our home, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
But so I think there's a very strong. I've done a number of workshops at the Army War College. Worked with senior enlisted people in the faculty of the Army War College, and we have taken groups of executives there for workshops, and I do a little session with the strategy guy at the Army War College. I do business strategy. He does our military strategy. We talk about all the things that are equal and some of the things that are different.
Yeah.
And I get some senior general, a 3 or hopefully a 4-star if I can, but that's not to talk about leadership. And they've got this be, know, do, which is similar to my 3 domains. First idea is to be. It's your character that matters here. And to know what needs to be done, to have the competence, and then to get it all done, to do it, to make sure everything gets mobilized. So there's a philosophy there.
Yeah.
But it starts again on this inside out thing. First, you have to be.
Yeah.
You have to be the leader people want to follow. And that basis is a basis of your character.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I like the simplicity of that. But that, again, starting inside out with the be, and then moving towards the action. Again, I think we often forget about the be part of stuff, and we skip right to the know. We want to know things and then do things.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I wanted to give you a chance to ask our next guest a question. So our next guest is a woman named Ashley Rutstein, and she works in the same field I came up in, advertising. She's a writer and a creative director, and she's created a really pretty strong social media following on TikTok and Instagram, where she just talks about the business in a very relatable, empathetic, but also clear-cut way of like, here's what we can do better, and here's what we are doing great. Do you have a question that I can share for her?
It's a question I think I asked you because you're also a creative person.
Yeah.
And it's a question that was on my mind when I was a CEO. When my head of marketing VP, came to me and he said, I'm in charge of all this, approving all this advertising and all the rest of it. And I'm sorry, but I'm not a very creative person. And I said, well, Tom, you have a team, right? And you're going to make this a sort of a team effort. So your job is to unlock creativity in others and unlock it in yourself. Ask them to help you unlock it within yourself as well. Stop telling yourself that you're not creative. Ask how you can become more creative than you are. We all got a baseline.
Right.
We're not all the same, but we all have the capacity to improve. So think about what creativity is all about and how you can improve it and unlock it in others. So my question would be a double-barrel question to her, is how do you go about improving your own creativity? And secondly, how do you unlock it in others?
Now, those are great questions, and it's often the biggest challenge of becoming a creative director, I think, is you've maybe started to learn how to unlock it in yourself, but figuring out how to unlock it in others is a very distinct skill. So I'm very curious to hear her response to that. I think it's
I don't know whether there are good techniques to do it, but I think it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to her answer for sure. Couple other questions before we go here. This is the DesuckifyWork Podcast, so I always wonder if you could wave a magic wand and create a fully desuckified work world for people, what does that look like?
Built on trust, number one. Treats people as human beings. And when you treat people as human beings, you take an interest in them and in their lives, and that's genuine. Not just as people who do work around the place. And you make sure that you get away from the urgent and think about the important, go on a retreat regularly. and have some fun together.
I love the sound of all of that. I think that, getting away from the urgent to focus on the important is about as critical as anything right now, because we are often swimming in the urgent so deeply that we don't even know what's important anymore. So I hope some folks take that to heart, and the having fun is certainly a big piece of what I like to bring to the world. I think fun and laughter and joy is just this amazing, it unlocks so much in us in terms of creativity and our ability to make things better in the world when we start from that place.
Humor humanizes people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Barriers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Helps us recognize our commonality with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so visceral, right? You can't fake that, like when laughter emerges, it just shoots out of us. We can't help it. So I think that is very grounding, I think, to your point. Speaking of fun and humor, one of the things I like to do on this show also is I put some sound effects into the show. If you listened, I think you listened to one recently, and you'll hear some cat sounds and some other things. And I always ask my guest if they're open to sharing a sound of their own that will show up in the episode. I always put it somewhere. So do you have a desuckified sound effect that you can add to our library, Willie?
When I thought about that, I saw that invitation to produce a sound, and I thought as deeply about that as I did about anything else. Because that requires an act of creativity, right?
Yeah.
So the one I thought about is the one I've done with my grandkids that makes them giggle and they try and do it, and they're struggling to do it. I learned it from my father. And I just look at how you do that, and then I practice it. I'm going to show you now, and here it is.
That's delightful. It came through perfectly. So that's good to know. And yeah, it's like a dove, right? I mean, that's what that is.
Like a dove.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Well, we have fun with it because the kids try and do it.
Yeah.
They tease each other. There are three of them. I have three grandkids. Twins are 10 years old, and there's an 8-year-old. Mm-hmm. And so, you sit around the breakfast table when they come and spend Christmas with us, etc. And we all do that thing again, Grandpa. I do it. They all try to do it, and it's fun.
Yeah, I'm going to try to learn it myself. You have piqued my curiosity, so I'm going to try to do that myself because it sounds fun, and I can. I don't know. It just sounds like it would be a fun way to bring some levity to any situation when you can do something fun and silly like that. The last question I want to ask you, Willie, is you've shared so much wonderful information. You've definitely got me thinking, and I imagine anyone listening is going to be piqued to learn more about what you're doing in the world. So what's the best way for folks to find more about you online?
I guess it would be on my website.
Okay.
Which got all my blogs and various other information.
Okay.
It's williepietersen.com.
Great. And I can share that in the show notes as well.
Pietersen, it's a weird Dutch spelling.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And I will share that. Do you, are you on LinkedIn at all?
Yes.
Okay. We can share a link to your LinkedIn as well, just because I know that a lot of folks listening will probably be on there as well. Well, Willie, I just want to say you've demonstrated this idea of a lifelong commitment to learning so well, both in how you showed up and some of the bits of knowledge that you were able to retrieve in real time. I thought that was really fun and fascinating for me as you were telling some of your stories and pulling a quote from this person or an experience from this person. And I think it's just a wonderful demonstration of the value of remaining curious, remaining excited about what's possible in the world and continuing to learn. And I think this idea that we have some agency over how we show up in the world, and that can also help us find ways to create a pace that works for us amidst all of the chaos that feels like it's surrounding us. I'm just really excited about what you've shared here, and I know a lot of people will resonate with it. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you, TJ, very much.
All right. Thank you, Willie. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Willie for bringing wisdom, wit, and a wonderfully vibrant spirit to the show. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, rate, review, subscribe, or consider running around the country like Forrest Gump and writing, "For a good time, listen to the DesuckifyWork Podcast" on the inside of every bathroom stall you pop into along the way. Don't forget to include the circle R, or our lawyers will track you down using elaborate handwriting analysis techniques in collaboration with our partners in the deep state. You can follow Willie on LinkedIn and check out his site at williepietersen.com. While you're there, make sure you take a peek at his latest book, Leadership: The Inside Story, time-tested prescriptions for those who seek to lead. My site and my Substack newsletter are quite peak-worthy as well. I'm on a mission to make work suck less, and I'd love for you to join me. Want to make that desuckification happen ASAP? Let's set up a free half-hour coaching session. Bye, everyone.